Welcome to part 2 of our adventure around Flambards Victorian Village. If you missed part 1, a look for the video link in the description alongside the link to the virtual walkaround. In part 2 we will explore the streets and stores, stopping to discover their history and how Flambards came to own them. The Victorian era was when the high street was born. Market traders moved into shops. During this time, trading regulations were far and few, leaving only one goal: selling anything to make money. Let's take a closer look. Dairy produce. A dairy shop in busy London was a welcome sight for Victorian city dwellers who didn't have daily deliveries from their local farms. Fresh eggs, milk and cheese could be found here, and in some cases, much like this store, cheese was made on site. However, cold meat, cheese and beer for breakfast was only if you could afford it. The ironmonger. The ironmonger was one of the key trades in the Victorian era, a one-stop shop for every Victorian household in need. Often, Victorian ironmongers also ran a forge, offering the sale or creation of everything and anything, from doorknobs to candlesticks. But the ironmonger would have also traded with his fellow store owners, crafting items, for example, with the butcher and the hooks they needed for their meat. Public Benefit Boot Co. William Henry Franklin founded Public Benefit Boot Co. in 1875. It later merged with the Dickinson's brothers in 1897, comprised of 57 shops and a factory. In 1904, the company struck a deal with Lennard's. By 1920, there were 143 stores. In 1946, it was renamed to Benefit Footwear. It then merged once more with Saxon and Light and Lilly in 1957. In 1962, it then passed into the hands of Charles Claus, British Shoe Corporation. The date the last store closed is unknown. Only during the Victorian era did they begin making shoes for left and right feet. In 1818, before this, shoes were interchangeable. Victorian women's feet were also an indicator to her femininity and status within society. The smaller the feet, the better. This led to women often wearing shoes several sizes too small, and in some cases, foot binding. Lewis and Ball Court Naval Military Tailors. Lewis and Ball tailors, here we see the bespoke tailoring of military uniforms of the 1800s. This would have been a gentleman-only establishment, offering up all manner of tailored attire, befitting of a court justice, naval and other military patterns, including hats and trimmings. Tobacconist and newsagents. London was once the smoking capital of the world. Tobacco was introduced to London from Florida in the mid-16th century and popularised at court by Sir Walter Raleigh. By the 1590s, Londoners were addicted. Physicians and chemists also jumped on the tobacco train. Anything to turn a profit, they claimed tobacco as a cure-all and even prescribed it. During the Victorian period, the signs and shop fronts of a tobacconist generally consisted of a large wooden Indian, much like we see here. A Victorian tobacconist would have sold a variety of tobacco, from the kind you could stuff in a pipe and smoke, or snuff, a fine mixture you snorted up your nose, to chew, a mouth tobacco. Flambards Fire Station. The fire engine we see here was made in London by Shand and Manson. Shand and Manson, a British company which designed and manufactured steam-powered fire engines during the 19th and early 20th century. Flambards Birch Birch Co grocers. In May 1979, while collecting a carriage from the Cotswolds to add to the Victorian Village, the team stumbled upon an antique shopfront. The team purchased it on the spot. Along with the shopfront came various other items, such as the mahogany display shelves, scales, canisters, and cheese cutters. In fact, some of the containers still had oats, rice, and coffee beans inside. Before being purchased by Flambards, the artefacts had been passed through many hands, and the history of the store had become lost along the way, until a visitor to Flambards recognised the shop, which he had previously visited in Angel Court in London. Birch Birch Co began trading from a shop in Cornwall in 1690 by a Mr. Horton and a Mr. Birch. Horton left the business in 1740, where the Birch family took over, extending the business and began serving meals. The company went on to provide food events which Queen Victoria and Prince Albert attended. Perhaps the most famous of the Birch family was Samuel Birch, 1757 to 1841, who was not only appointed as Sheriff of London, but later went on to become the city's Lord Mayor. After Samuel's death, the shop went to his nephew, whose name was Ring, but he continued to trade under the existing Birch Birch Co. The shop was demolished in 1926 to make way for a large bank, and finally again in 1973 in Angel Court, London. Victorian grocers waited on their customers twice daily, once to collect their order and again to deliver the goods. However, the types of customer a typical Victorian grocer would have preferred would be the ones that would visit the shop themselves, as once inside, a customer would be tempted, or rather talked into, buying more. Often, grocers employed errand boys to carry out the customers' goods back to their house. Victorian grocer was the heart of the high street, and through time stood as the pillar to the community, even more so during the World Wars. The butcher. No Victorian high street would be complete without a local butcher. Here we see Borthwick's butcher shop, displaying a variety of products from meat pies, beef, pork, mutton, and game. It was common in Victorian London to step over a gutter before entering the butcher's, a gutter running with blood. Evidently, the Victorian butcher was not for the squeamish, yet hanging carcasses would have been all too common, noting that the average Victorian wouldn't have batted an eyelash at such a sight. Mag's photographer. The routines of everyday life were rarely photographed during the 19th century, unlike today's modern technology where a simple snap on your phone can capture your lunch. During the Victorian era, sitting for a prolonged period of time to have your picture taken often resulted in the photographer using cast iron posing stands to hold you in place. Photos taken during this era would have been for special occasions only, such as engagements and weddings. However, there is a sinister side to Victorian photography. Photographs known as memorial portraits or post-mortem photography. In a time when disease and death was spreading through the masses, and in particular infants and young children, families would have a photographer capture the image of the dead loved one. This included posing the body. As much as this may seem morbid to you and I, this was a common practice of the time, a personal image to immortalize their loved ones. The toy store. Here we see R. J. Neville, the toy man. During the Victorian period, toys were rarely purchased except for special occasions such as birthdays and Christmas. Rich little girls would have commonly had a cot and baby doll. Victorians viewed toys as educational as well as entertainment. Girls would be taught motherhood and boys educated in their father's career in preparation for it to continue down the family line. Rich little boys would have had a toy soldier. A particular special toy that wealthy girls and boys would have played with, on a Sunday only, was Noah's Ark. Again, Victorian parents used such a toy to educate their children in Christian belief. However, for poor children, toys were often handmade from household objects, such as a clothes peg turned into a doll or a hoop and stick to chase down the street. The Pheasant Inn. Bars, typically around the 1840s onward, operated based on class. Pubs, even relatively small ones, such as the Pheasant Inn, would typically be split into several rooms to cater to the separation of both rich and poor. The bakery. A Victorian baker's day was long, usually starting at 4 a.m. and for 7 days a week. A typical bakery would have been family run, with even the children pulling their weight. The best-selling product of the Victorian baker was not the fresh loaf, but the stale or settled bread as it was known at this time. This was because it was cheap and would last longer, as it wasn't so tasty and one wouldn't want more. Women who worked in the bakery would have been kept out back. Only men served the customers. This was until 1870s, where the popular rise of the tea rooms began. A lot of bakeries branched out into tea rooms, where ladies of leisure would socialise. A Victorian tea room was a women-only establishment. Only women could enter, and only women could serve their customers. It was during this role reversal we saw the rise of social groups and shared opinions, a safe house for women, and the dawn of the suffragettes. The sweet shop. Here we see Miss Broughton, the sweetmaker. Confectionery, such as lollies and hard-boiled sweets, once started life as medicinal, a way to make medicines easier to swallow, with a sweeter taste. They were used for digestive issues, sore throats, using the likes of lemon drops and humbugs as lozenges. During the Victorian era, with increased access to refined sugar, the medicinal uses slowly phased out and replaced with the intention to create them as a sweet treat. Sweets became cheap to make, and the market branded from a wealthy customer to just about anyone being able to afford them, and in particular, children. You take a closer look at what's on offer, I'm certain many of you will recognise the brands that we still see in our stores today. K. Fillingham, 1840. Hats, bonnets, gloves and dressing pins. Here we see a Victorian accessory store, selling a range of products from hats and bonnets, dress gloves, purses, boleros, boas and much more. The Victorian era was almost a century of fashion. Hat styles changed every few years, and there were hats for every occasion: walking and riding, morning wear, evening wear, church and special occasions. And it was the same for the gloves. It goes without saying that the more elaborate and fancy hats and accessories we see here came at a price. The poor would have handmade their hats and bonnets at home, and usually these were only for church. A good thing to note is that Victorian women of wealth dressed to impress. Her clothing said a lot about her as a person and her social status. Lurg, oilman, general dealer and potato merchant. Mr. Lurg would have been an early version of today's home store, selling a number of things from cleaning products for your home, your body, your floors, your clothes, your brass. In a time of diseases and death, a new obsession of cleaning sparks the sales of cleaning products, whether they worked or not. If you could clean it, there was a soap or an oil for the job. Mr. Lugg would have also sold many other things, from some small grocer's products like cocoa and potatoes, as well as candles and brushes, gas lamps and their oils. But remember, not every product performed as stated on the tin. It was until 1860 the Food and Drugs Act saw the start of controlling the sale of dangerous and false products, and again in 1866 with the Sanitary Act. The chemist. A Victorian pharmacy would have packed a range of products, which not all would have worked. The Victorian era saw the use of opium, herbs and spices. Not every pharmacist knew what they were doing. A good portion of Victorian pharmacists popped up out of nowhere, selling cure-alls and tonics to fix anything from balding to sore backs. There were two types of chemists during the Victorian period: a man well practised, who learned his trade as an apprentice with some good medicinal knowledge, or the chemist who was a quick-trick mad scientist, mixing all manner of concoctions for money. Cure-alls of the time were laced with all manner of nasties and claimed to cure a number of things. Paranoid Victorians could consume hundreds of pills a week in hopes of avoiding sickness and death. Licorice could be found in most products to mask the smell and taste. Chemists were known as doctors of the poor, but also saw the trade of wealthy customers. Over time, chemists offered a wide range of services, from leeches and bloodletting to dentistry, breathing tents, and electric shock therapy. The printing press. The Victorian period was an enormous change in the world of printing, with the development of steam printing presses. Metal plates saw the replacement of limestone slabs. The machine we see here was widely used even up to World War II. The machine is not operational, but Flambards have recreated the sound. Let's take a listen. Flambards Hotel. Hotels in Britain were rare before the 1800s. It was from 1810 onwards public houses and hotels were purposely built, starting in London and later into large provincial towns. During the later Victorian era, these buildings became more flamboyant, notable for their decorated mirrors, tiled walls, and etched glass. With the coming of the railways, a number of hotels were built close to stations. During this time we saw the decline of coaching inns, although some were able to mutate into hotels. This leads us on to finally my personal favourite display Flambards has to offer, the famous William White Chemist time capsule. This beautiful Victorian chemist, once owned by William White, it was discovered in a Somerset village in 1987. It had been entombed for 80 years. William White practiced his profession in this shop from 1880 until his death in 1909. At that time, the items you see here were locked away by his son, who, not being a qualified chemist, could not continue the business. The presence of the sealed room remained hidden from the outside world until the death and old age of the second of two spinster sisters, Margaret and Evelyn, granddaughters of William, who lived out their long lives on the premises. The property was to be sold. It was the end of 107 years' occupancy by the White family. It was also the end of an era. It was only then that the locked door was opened to reveal its hidden past to the single beam of a torch and an astonished auctioneer. News of the discovery soon captured the imagination of the entire country. The shop fittings and all its stock you see here were auctioned shortly after and bought on a telephone bid by Flambards. Flambards began a painstaking task to number and chart thousands of artifacts, right down to the cobwebs you see. The team then reassembled every medicine bottle, apothecary jar, quartz cardboard, pill dispenser in exactly the same positions they found them in, minus the dangerous compounds and poisons that the British Home Office confiscated. And this concludes our Victorian village adventure, but it's not over yet. I've purposely left out many shops and scenes that you see flashing now. This is to encourage you to visit Flambards for yourself, as I cannot recreate the smell and sense of adventure of personally being there. Next time, we will be fast-forwarding through history to take a wander around Britain in the Blitz, also at Flambards. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe for future content such as Britain in the Blitz, Fashion Through Time, World War II and much more. Until next time.